হ্যালো গাইস, কেমন আছো? আজকে আমরা রিয়্যাক্ট করব হিস্টোরি। এন্ড আমি এখন ও চ্যানেল দেখি নাই। সো আচ্ছা, আমরা এখানে আসি। আচ্ছা চলো শুরুতে যাই। আচ্ছা, ফার্স্ট ভিডিও।
My family's Halloween skeleton in half for a TikTok, so I rebuilt him into a trap. I just stapled the tiny top hat on a 12-foot Home Depot skeleton dressed like Art the Clown when four kids spilled out of a Subaru laughing. Before I got to the door, they threw Art to the ground, and the main kid started teabagging him while the rest pulled out their phones. One pointed at me. Bro, look at his face, he's about to cry. Another ripped the skeleton in half and ran it back to the car, and they drove off before I could catch up. I walked over and pulled what was left of Art upright, fists clenched. I carried the pieces into the garage and laid him on the workbench. My wife surprised me with that skeleton before she passed, and dressing him up was our tradition. This year I'd made him Art, her favorite movie character, to honor her. Half the block had called the cops on these kids, and nothing ever came of it. By morning, their clip had 1 million views, and the comments wanted a sequel. They came back for it the next Halloween. I waited out front in a scarecrow costume and asked them to leave my yard alone. The main kid lowered his phone and grinned. Bro, you dressed up to ask us nicely? The others were dying. A grown man begging in burlap was their best clip yet. That night, they dragged the skeleton into the street, chanting, "Drag him, drag him, drag him," the whole way. Their clip of me carrying what was left into the garage broke their view record. I shut the garage door and stood there in the dark before I picked up the welder. For the next year, I rebuilt Art from the boots up, the spring-loaded arm, the hand loaded with fake blood that doesn't come off skin for a week. I hammered 3 feet of steel into the lawn and bolted him to it. The night before Halloween, I held the spring in my hand for a long time before I set it. The lawn looked friendlier than ever, Art smiling out at the street with a happy haunting sign on the gate. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. The main kid swaggered across the grass. "Third year running, baby. Say hi to Art," he yelled as he jumped up to slap the skeleton's face. Art's arm swung down and caught his wrist, and the fake blood in the hand soaked the kid's hoodie and the face of the kid next to him. The main kid hit the grass and sobbed into his sleeve while the others scattered. Art stood bolted to 3 feet of steel, smiling. I walked out and pointed at him. "Bro, look at his face, he's actually crying." A neighbor walking by had filmed the whole thing, and by morning the clip was on every screen in the neighborhood. Fake blood smeared from his hairline to his collarbone, which was still on his face a week later when I saw him speed walk past Art. 4 kids ripped ever since my wife's car accident 2 years ago. She could not
আচ্ছা, আমরা পরের সবচেয়ে পপুলার সবচেয়ে পপুলার Alright, I think this one.
My twin brother Chris and I were 9 when we learned Morse code. We tapped messages under the dinner table when Mom told us to stop talking and tapped through the wall between our bedrooms every night. When Chris got into a car accident and the doctor said he'd never wake up, I pulled up a chair next to his bed, took his hand, and tapped. "Are you there?" Nothing. But I came back the next afternoon and tapped again. Before I left, I always said the same thing. "See you tomorrow, Chris." A week later, Chris's fingers twitched against mine, and I almost fell out of my chair. I grabbed a nurse and she barely looked up. They're reflexes. It doesn't mean anything. I bought a notebook the next day and started writing down every single one. 4 months in, Mom watched me scribbling and said, "How long are you gonna keep doing this?" "Until he taps back." "He's not gonna tap back. You're talking to a corpse." Dad lasted a few more months before he pulled me into the hallway. "We need to talk about donating your brother's organs. His fingers move every time I hold his hand, Dad. The nurses said those are reflexes. Stop getting your hopes up, son." "I don't care what the nurses say. You're not donating my brother's organs." But a week later, my parents called to have Chris transferred to a long-term facility to die and scheduled a meeting to sign the papers. The afternoon before the meeting, I tapped into his palm like always, but this time, something tapped back. Short, short, short. Long, long, long. Short, short, short. SOS. I grabbed his hand. "Chris, if that's you, squeeze once." He squeezed so hard my knuckles cracked. I stormed into the meeting room and told them my brother just responded to me. The caseworker said, "This is very common with families who aren't ready to let go." My parents nodded. I grabbed the transfer papers off the table. "You're not signing anything until you come see for yourself." I walked them to Chris's bed and grabbed his hand. "Ask him anything." The caseworker asked what year it was. Chris squeezed out the answer. "Count to 5. 5 perfect squeezes." His grandmother's name, tapped out letter by letter. By the 10th question, she said, "He's still alive. We can't move him." Weeks later, I asked Chris what kept him fighting when everyone gave up. Heard mom call me a corpse. Heard dad say donate my organs. Heard all of them leave, except you. I asked why. I wanted to see you too. My twin brother Chris and I were 9 when we learned Morse code. We tapped messages under the dinner table when mom told us to stop talking and tapped through the wall between our bedrooms every night. The flight attendant slipped me a napkin that said, "The pilot..."
আচ্ছা আমরা তারপর আমরা সবচেয়ে ওল্ডেস্ট এইও সবচেয়ে মানে সবচেয়ে ভাইরাল আছে খুঁজি না পাচ্ছি না মনে হয় এটাই যেটা 6.1 মিলিয়ন আছে The oldest one. Check where is it? Where is it?
My son came home from school crying his eyes out, telling me he was getting bullied because of the huge birthmark on his shoulder. But as soon as the school nurse called me the next day saying I needed to take him to the hospital, I realized how serious this was. She told me another student had tried to cut it off with a pair of scissors, and at that moment, we started homeschooling him. But just as we thought things would get better, my son ran into the kitchen, saying he saw somebody outside. We looked and quickly found out that same jerk knew where we lived. He started throwing rocks at our windows, leaving scissors outside our house just to taunt him. And when I called his parents and sent proof, they assured me he'd be grounded. Finally, we thought it was over. My son could have his normal life back, but the second he knew he was alone, he threw a brick through our kitchen window and climbed inside, ready to get revenge. He made his way upstairs, calling out how bad he was gonna hurt him, having no idea that my son had just grabbed my loaded handgun. He finally found my son's door and said, "Time to die, loser." And the second he flung it open, my son saw him standing there holding the large knife. The bully lunged at him, but seconds away from stabbing him, my son fired twice, both hitting him in the chest. The ambulances didn't make it in time. It was ruled as self-defense. My son came home. I woke up late for school, and my son came home from school crying his eyes out, telling me twice, both hitting him in the chest. The ambulances didn't make it in time. It was ruled as self-defense. My son, I woke up late for school, and it saved my life.
আমরা এখন সবচেয়ে কিছু পাবো যেটা সবচেয়ে পপুলার আছে খুঁজি তো সবচেয়ে পপুলার না দেখি তো পাচ্ছি না এটাই মনে হয়
The night I robbed my father was the night I stopped hating him. My dad kept a metal chest in the corner of our garage that nobody was allowed to touch. It sat there for years, covered in cobwebs, with faded red letters that said, "Do not open." When I was 8 and my brother Joel was 6, we got caught just standing near it, not touching it, just looking. Dad's face turned purple. He grabbed the thickest belt from the wall and locked us in the garage for 20 minutes. After that, we stayed far away from the chest, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. What was so important that he'd beat us just for looking? The garage was where Dad kept his tools hanging on the wall like a display. Leather belts arranged by thickness. Extension cords wrapped in perfect coils. A wooden paddle he'd made himself, still stained with old brown spots. If we got anything below a B on our report cards, it meant an hour in the garage. If we talked back, the tools came out. And just to make sure we really learned our lesson, he'd spray cleaning solution on the wounds so they'd burn and sizzle while we screamed. Mom would turn up the TV and pretend nothing was happening. One night, Joel spilled juice on Dad's work papers by accident. I watched Dad's eyes go dark as he stood up from the table. Garage. Now, that session was different. Dad used everything on the wall. He told Joel he was going to beat the ADHD out of him. Joel passed out twice, and Dad dumped cold water on him to wake him up so he could keep going. I stood outside the door listening to my little brother beg for mercy while Mom vacuumed the living room. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I couldn't make myself move. Something inside me broke that night. I got a job at the grocery store and hid money in a sock under my mattress. I researched bus routes and cities where 2 teenage boys could disappear, but I needed more money than minimum wage could give me. That's when I started thinking about the chest again. The opportunity came 6 months later when Dad left for a weekend hunting trip. I shook Joel awake at midnight. We're leaving tonight. We crept down to the garage with flashlights, and my hands were
আচ্ছা ওর ছেলে বা কেন বক্স খুলতে পারবে না
As I pulled the tarp off the chest, I found a crowbar on the wall and wedged it under the lock. It took 3
ক্রোবার
tries before the metal snapped. Inside was nothing like I'd imagined. Stacks of $100 bills wrapped in rubber bands. Underneath the money was a black handgun and a box of bullets. And at the very
হ্যান্ডগান আছে কেন
bottom, photographs. I held one up to my flashlight
এই
and my
ফটোগ্রাফ টাকা হ্যান্ডগান বুলেট এরা আছে কেন
stomach lurched. It was Dad as a kid, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with bruises covering his arms and face. Standing behind him was a man who looked like an older, meaner version of my father, his father. I grabbed all the money and stuffed it in my backpack. Joel reached for the gun, but I slapped his hand away. We're not like him. We left the gun exactly where we found it. 3 months later, my aunt tracked us down at the motel where we'd been staying. He's gone. I gripped the phone harder. What do you
হয় কি
mean gone? He went into the garage 3 nights ago and didn't come out. Your mom heard screaming for hours, then one loud bang. My legs gave out, and I sat down hard on the motel bed. He left a note, she said. 5 words. I failed. I couldn't break the silence. The night I robbed my father was
এমনি করে
when 2 guys and
আচ্ছা সবাই চলে যাও এন্ড গুড বাই